Hello, CPAC Hungary. It's wonderful to have you here. It's a great feeling to have this conference here, and it's an honor to welcome you all. And it's a special honor to welcome our guests for this panel discussion on foreign policy and security. Dr. Shay Bradley Farrell. She is the president of Counterpoint Institute, a conservative Washington think tank. Her work focuses on national security, women's issues, and human rights. She's a regular guest on One American Network and a regular contributor to well-known publications such as National Review and The Federalist. It's not her first visit to Hungary. She has been a guest lecturer at Matthias Corvinus Collegium and spoke at the 3rd Budapest Demographic Summit. Shay. Professor James Carafano is a leading expert in national security and foreign policy challenges. He is the Vice President of Heritage Foundation's Catherine and Shelby Cullom Davis Institute for National Security. And Anne Elizabeth Moutet, a columnist for the UK's leading newspaper, The Daily Telegraph. During her career, she has reported for a number of major media outlets, including the BBC, GB News, German and Austrian public broadcasters. She has opposed the rise of radical Islam and has been a vocal critic of the French government's failure to tackle mass migration. Welcome, Anne Elizabeth. So, I am a dad of two, and there are two reasons why I say that. One reason is that I think that we should remember that CPAC is for the future of our kids. We all work for the future of our kids. We want to ensure that they can grow up in a sane society. That's why we are all here, I suppose. The second reason is that I promised my son to ask the first question in a way that even a 4-year-old might understand. So that's what's going to happen now. If you think about European and or American foreign policy, what cartoon character comes to mind?
Yeah.
Right, me. Wile E. Coyote. Because, Wile E. Coyote, for those who are not familiar with him, is the coyote that essentially gets things always wrong and repeatedly is hit by an anvil falling from the sky on his head or on his big toe. And honestly, what we've been doing recently in foreign policy is very much like it.
I immediately saw a Mickey Mouse in my head.
Was it a male mouse?
It was a male mouse.
Or a gender-neutral mouse?
No, totally male, because Mickey Mouse is silly and cute and ineffective, and he has a little squeaky voice, and that's what I feel right now about our ruling parties anyway, especially on, David was talking about immigration. I feel like it's like talking to Mickey Mouse to explain to our ruling parties why we must have secure borders. That's one example.
So is it the U.S. or the U.S. and Europeans?
You can choose either one or both.
So it could be like Tom and Jerry, right? So there's a lot of give and take and a little wacky craziness. But hopefully we shake hands at the end. So yeah, I'll go with that.
Yeah, all right. Okay, let's move on to something more serious, tragic even. The elephant in the room is, of course, the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. And as a panel on foreign policy and security, we must address this situation. All our countries would have hoped never to address such a war in Europe. It is very clear the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and our new President Katalin Novak have expressed very clearly that Hungary's national interests demand peace as soon as possible. However, it's a very contentious issue and it's very difficult to see a way towards peace. What do you think on the matter? Shay, would you like to start?
You want to start? Go ahead.
Oh, Jim, go
No,
ahead.
ladies first.
It's not my habit to talk negatively about my own government. But I believe that our administration handled it extremely poorly. They should have began to try to broker peace a long time ago. I think that it's a situation that's boding very badly for Ukraine. But we didn't have the leverage that our president was saying we had with economic sanctions. Russia didn't really care that much about that because Russia supplies the EU with a lot of natural resources. It's a huge supplier. I also agree with your prime minister yesterday. He said that it is a very tragic situation, and I'm for the Ukrainian people to have their own sovereignty and their own independence. But I also believe it is not in the interest of the United States, and that we have to really tread very carefully in this situation.
Jim or Elizabeth?
Yes, this debate is under the heading of security and homeland. And I don't think there's anything more sort of immediate in questions of sort of securing one's own homeland than what's happening just next door in Ukraine. You have a country that was attacked, that was not invading Russia in any way, shape, or form, that had already been partly invaded by Russia, and which has to defend itself. And Ukraine was given extremely good information by the United States, but could not even believe that it was possible, which was, total war and kill lists in Kyiv. And what has happened since then is the execution of something that it was not believable in 2022. It is a way of waging war which is similar to what was happening in 1943 in about the same region. So Ukraine is defending herself, and Ukraine is not asking for any foreign troops on her soil. Ukraine, since 2014, trained her army, introduced conscription, changed and bought armaments and built equipment, modern armament, since it was one of the places of the old Soviet Union where it was built. And it has created, with reserve units, with an army of people, with 300,000 people who have experience each of fighting in the Donbass for several months, because the war never stopped there. There have been 14,000 dead there that not many people spoke about between 2014 and today. And they, I believe, can win this war, and they can win this war for two reasons, and there are two reasons that are perfectly understandable, I think, in Hungary, which is that the Russian tanks are here in our country and we do not want them. And this happened in Budapest in 1956. I think there's a historical memory of it. So what they're asking is essentially solidarity and more weapons. And and that was really a key moment when the President of the United States offered President Zelensky, we can exfiltrate you from Kyiv because they want to kill you. He said, I don't need a ride, I need armament. There are moments in life, and not many of us, and I do not wish them on us, in which there is complete clarity. And the clarity is you have a hero there, and you've got barbarians coming in, and everything that is coming out in the news, and there is a team of French forensic gendarmes right now taking evidence on what was happening in those places occupied by the Russians when they left. And they are finding evidence of unspeakable torture, of a man who was flayed alive, of people who've been raped, girls of 10 who were raped and left dead. All of this one day there will be a reckoning. In the meantime, there has been talk of a ceasefire and saying people who suffer, it must stop. But the Ukrainians, who actually were amenable to the idea of a ceasefire, as they discover the horror that has been perpetrated by the Russians, they say, we want to win. I have massive admiration for this. I think all of us and all the people who feel for Eastern Europe should feel for that. The only thing that they want is essentially material help. The rest they will do themselves. It's for them to decide when they want to stop. Right now they're saying, no, it's too horrible. So my attitude to this is any of our countries that does not give this aid is essentially thinking, okay, I'll wait this one out, and if the Russians come again, not my fault. And that's all I'll say on this.
Yeah, I think I'd like to talk about the Ukrainians, who I think have played a difficult hand relatively appropriately. And I think it's actually an important thing to unpack because it reflects the nature of what's going on in the modern world. I just saw the president, or U.S. president today, tweet that he was going to Asia to reinforce the importance of the rules of the road. I mean, this is utter nonsense. that China cares about the rules of the road. And the problem is we just haven't explained this to them. This notion of a rules-based order, this is leftover fantasy from the 90s. We live in a world that is ruled by force, not by rules. And this notion that somehow the rules will come and save us is ludicrous. And so we need to rediscover the strategic muscle, the logic of how you make hard decisions in a world where people really do mean you ill. And I just want 2 points. One is a government's job, the fundamental things that it actually must do, is about helping keep a nation free and safe and prosperous. And you don't get credit for 2 out of 3. If you cannot deliver on that whole agenda, you are failing. And so I think when you look at the challenges that Hungary has faced in terms of its own economy, refugees, energy, its defense, its role in NATO, I think this government has tried to say, we need to address all of these, not just the ones people would like us to address or the ones that are easy to address. That, I think, is an important factor in modern statecraft, in modern leadership. And the other is you have to have a realistic assessment of your interests. There are vital interests, which are things that you will die to defend. The security and of your country is immediately threatened. You will put troops in the field and they will bleed and die. And then there are important things that are valuable to do, and then there are kind of peripheral interests. For years we've ignored these rules and we've just done whatever the hell we please because we didn't really think anybody was going to really hold us accountable. Well, this is game time. And the reality is Ukraine for Hungary, and really for NATO, is not a vital interest. But it is an important interest. And I think the reality is, and we've seen this, is for NATO, it's not about Ukraine. This, I believe, and this is Putin's first step to have a Europe that is disorganized, destabilized, marginalized, and distracted. And to essentially see NATO dissolve, America leave, and have America alone and isolated. I think this is exactly what the Chinese want. I think Russia, in many ways, is China's stalking horse in Europe. China wants a Europe that's weakened and divided and distracted. We have a common interest in helping Ukraine stop the Russians. I think the NATO nations have responded remarkably, with a remarkable amount of seriousness, and I think Hungary has been part of that. I mean, Hungary has made very clear that the invasion, that naked aggression is wrong, that human rights abuses are wrong. Hungary has been a supportive member of NATO, and they've made hard choices, and even though it's forced them to make some hard calls. So, look, everybody who is not in Hungary can second guess Hungary's policies, right? But if you are here and you are doing all the things that are important for your people and your nation and meeting your responsibility as a member of a defensive alliance, I think this shows a degree of seriousness about this government in the way they've looked at a real crisis.
And I just wanted to comment on something Jim said, because we're looking at it really from a large geopolitical view, correct? And he was mentioning strength, and peace through strength, even if it's been said a long time, is still true. But it's not just true in military power. It's true also in public diplomacy. And this is what I alluded to when I was speaking about the U.S. government. I believe this administration has totally abandoned any kind of model of deterrence, and which showed the U.S. as a country willing to respond. And I go back to Afghanistan as perhaps the largest example of that, where we showed the world that we also abandon our allies in a very bad way. Whatever you think about Trump foreign policy, I will say that Putin did not amass military and troops and invade Ukraine during his administration, because he did have that public diplomacy of America will respond, and I think that that's extremely important.
And let's note that Putin did not invade under the Trump administration.
Yeah. So
Isn't
what,
Exactly.
what cartoon character is Trump then? I'm just kidding.
too many cartoons characters put together, but that was a fair question to me. Yeah.
But I would totally agree that I don't think Putin would have invaded Ukraine in the same way if Trump had been president, because when you talk about deterrence, the presence of Trump in the White House was deterrence. And that is something that has been lost. It's not very popular to say this in Europe. It's especially not popular to say this in my country, in France. But certainly, in all choices of foreign policy, the presence of Trump was something in which it was very clear that a line should not be passed. And other presidents of the United States have talked about red lines, and then they allow those red lines to be passed. So I'm pretty sure that it would have been unpredictable, and therefore wiser minds might have prevailed in the Kremlin.
Jim, you mentioned that we should forget about the term rules-based order. Do you think there was ever such a thing as a rules-based order, or was it always that realism ruled and politicians and the chattering class imagined that there was something else?
Yeah, well, you've outed me. I'm a realist. I always thought this rules-based order stuff was just absolute, complete nonsense. I mean, it was a fine thing to say around the campfire in the 90s when there weren't any serious challenges. But I mean, as people saw, nations like China rise, this argument that somehow if we just all respect the rules, we'd be fine. This is utter nonsense. And sadly, you still hear this. I don't hear it much in Central Europe, where I think people are close enough to the reality that they realize that these comments are just nonsense, and I think your point about Trump is exactly right. Trump never said, "Okay, don't worry about the Russians because I'll make sure they follow the rules." Trump said, "If you do things that impinge on my national, I will slap you in the head." There's a very famous incident, which I believe is true because I heard it from Russians and Europeans, where there were some Russian mercenaries that went after an American base in Syria, and Trump just ordered to take them out, and they just carpet bombed and just wiped them out. And when Putin heard about this, he said, "Okay, let's just not do that again." Right. So I think Putin feared and respected Trump because he demonstrated that he would fight for his interests, and in many ways, I think that's what makes Orban successful. I mean, we could have all kinds of arguments about his policies, but it's very clear that Orban puts the interests of his people first, and he makes it very clear that he will defend those interests. And if you cross that line, he will deal with that. And I think we actually need more of that. So, but this gets to the point about this really about force, because I think this gets to the real issue, because I think right now we're all doing the easy stuff. I mean, we're giving food and supplies and help and weapons to Ukraine. And honestly, I think that's the easy stuff. What makes Russia a threat in the future? And there are only two things. One is the military. And you could say, well, they're not really very competent, but they've proven they're incredibly competent at killing lots of innocent people who are unarmed, and they're very competent at destroying their lives and livelihood. And if you're a country that is unbordered with near Russia, that's a problem. And the other is energy, which I think nobody knows better than the challenge that Hungary faces in energy independence. We have to figure out how to take those two tools off the table. Europe has to have affordable, reliable, and abundant energy, and there has to be a forward defense of NATO that that cannot just, if you cross this blue line, we'll fight back, but if you cross this blue line, we will kill you. Those are hard choices. We can argue about where troops are stationed and what those capabilities look like, and we argue about how we get to energy independence, but if we can't tackle those two issues, then all we are doing is finishing the war before the next war with Russia.
And I would add another issue to that is that the alliances that Russia is strengthening around the world that are definitely very concerning. Russia and China, most of y'all know, at the Olympics signed a joint statement that was a clear direction of more collaboration. At the same time, they signed more oil and gas deals, $8 or $80 billion, I can't remember, but a 10-year long deal. China and Iraq are making an alliance also that Russia is involved in, and so Russia, of course, is already a member of the BRICS alliance. So all of these things, the deals with China, the deals they already have with BRICS, are being strengthened, and not everybody's paying attention to this, and it's given them ability to circumvent these international sanctions that were supposed to be very hard, long term at least.
I'm totally with Jay on rule-based order, because I do not think that it exists except like nations like in the European Union, where you're not likely to go at war against one another. So when you get into the real world outside, it gets worse. But I'd like people here, there must be people here who remember the 80s, when Russia was still a communist country, but they had the same energy interests. They were producing nothing except energy and gas, oil and gas. And that, by a strange coincidence, you had all those well-funded, well-bussed campaigns and demonstrations against nuclear power. And nuclear power was supposed to be horrible, and it killed people, and was against the planet. And never mind that scientists would tell you that it was carbon neutral. No, we didn't want it. And a great Soviet dissident, now dead, whom I interviewed a long time ago, Andrei Zinoviev, told me, look, you think those buses come for free? And that was a time when we weren't thinking of the cost of politics. And I said, no, I suppose not. 50 buses one day, 60 buses another day. He said, think again, and that's a lesson I've never forgotten. And now we've got all the Greens again, who are allies in lots of governments. They don't poll so many votes on their own. They could never create a government on their own, but it doesn't matter, because they have become the conscience, the green conscience for the new green religion of Western Europe. And what does it say? Essentially is keep being dependent of Russian oil and gas. And the one way to get effective, clean power is to have nuclear. And so anybody who's studied, how nuclear works knows that as long as you apply all the redundancies in the nuclear power plants, it is safe. France gets 70% of our electricity through nuclear power, which we built since the first oil crunch of 1974, because we realized that somebody at the time, it was the cartel of the Arab countries, would hold us to ransom, and we didn't want that. So the one lesson to take out of that, and many things have got to be done, green and clean energies are fine, have as many solar panels as you want. We're finding out today that they could be quite useful to power things in this building, but have nuclear energy.
All right. We still have a little bit of time. This next topic would deserve much more than this. But beyond having the prospect of a major European war, we are also facing another huge problem, which is mass illegal migration. And I know that the United States has a problem with that as well. Joe Biden is often criticized for neglecting the southern border and caring more about Ukraine's border than the United States border. So that's our final issue for today. What do you think? And maybe Anna Elizabeth could start this time.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear half the question.
Immigration and border security.
Mass migration.
Yes.
Mass migration.
Okay. Well, the question is that we have two sides who are playing on essentially they're playing different games. And one game is to say, look, this is moral, these people are unhappy, how dare you deny them a chance to a free life. And most of us can count migrants from one place to another in their ancestry. I mean, I suspect all the Americans here practically have been migrants to America at one stage. But we also know that there are now 2 billion people in Africa, and there is no way that Europe can receive them unless the economic state of our own countries becomes close to one of the countries that they came from. And we've just had something that we didn't expect to see again, which is war in Europe. So what do we do in terms of migration? And I think it's very interesting to listen to the Japanese example, which I'm sure Shay knows quite well. I was in Japan 4 years ago, and I interviewed a number of people on the issues that were facing Japan. And Japan is a country that hasn't had Viktor Orbán as a prime minister, and therefore they do not have a natalist policy. And they do not have the things that are made so that families find it cheaper to have children, have fewer taxes, that there is childcare possibilities. In other words, to make it desirable for families to have children and not stop themselves for economic reasons. And that's a very healthy policy. So Japan has got an inverted pyramid of ages with old people people, many old people, and fewer young people. Japan also doesn't have a female president, the way you do in Hungary, for instance. And so women in Japan are still supposed to be drudges for their husbands. They're not interested. And young women in Japan are marrying less because they feel, I did not go to university to essentially be the maid of all trades at home. They've understood this. They realize that they've got strong opposition from old-fashioned men in Japan, but they're working on it. But they're also working on immigration. And they say, we have been studying what an advisor to the then Prime Minister Abe told me. We have been studying very carefully what you've been doing in Europe when it comes to immigration. And we studied you. You are about 40 years ahead of us. We are 40 years behind you. And our plan is to do exactly the opposite of what you've been doing. So no unlimited immigration, immigration by points as they have in Canada and Australia, and a number of conditions about immigration. No family regrouping, immigration by trade. One aspect is if the people who want to immigrate to Japan have a knowledge of jobs or academic specialty, and that's needed in Japan, then there's a fast track for them. They have a duty, and the duty is after 5 years they must speak Japanese. And then there's also immigration of people who will work in sort of service jobs, in industrial jobs. And again, these people do not come with their families, but there are ways of acquiring rights to stay longer in Japan, but other than that, they will have to leave after a comparatively short period of time. And the Japanese are people who see the long term. I think their advice is excellent. I think it absolutely tallies with what you're doing in Hungary. And the one thing that I told them at the time was, work faster on women because they will not have children if that means they become second-class citizens. But other than that, that's the lesson to draw. And we are being too sentimental in some places, and other places it's because there's a whole trend that has been very well described throughout this entire conference, which is a disgust of our civilization, a refusal of our civilization, a desire to make the past and history disappear, and that is a political trope which has been very well developed here. You keep at it, it's true. And so as long as we feel that we want to defend our civilization, we have to stick by what we want, which is we want to accept people so that they're well treated when they come to our countries, as long as they behave well, and they want to stay or they want to assimilate. That's the only thing I would say.
Yeah, right. It's very unfortunate that we have so little time, so could you, in 1 minute each, maybe express your opinions?
Go ahead. I have one clip.
I'll give it a try. Our vice president and our administration in the United States declared Ukrainian borders sovereign, and their sovereignty inviolate, and that we were committed to attack with severe consequences if Putin invaded. Well, okay, well and good. I believe in the sovereignty also of Ukraine. But our president has not just a few problems at our border, he's completely lifted the rule of law. And I've spent a lot of time down there, and it is not the narrative that he floats, humane, orderly, and safe. Illegal immigrants have to collaborate with Mexican cartels, and law enforcement down there that I've talked to, in their words, are tired of picking up dead bodies that the Mexican cartels have brought over, either people exhausted or raped, shot, etc. It is not. That's a very short synopsis. What my beef is that the EU ruling parties and the American ruling parties do not understand inviolate and sovereignty on their own borders or on the Mexican border in the United States, but they do understand it for Ukraine, because our president said that if Russia continued to come west during a State of the Union speech, he would defend NATO allies and gave a list of those, but he didn't mention Hungary, which makes me wonder if he would defend Hungary, because he also did not invite the Hungarian government to our democratic summit in December and continues to try to undermine the ideology here through our State Department.
I just really wanted to say I'm really deeply upset, because normally on a panel I get to sit on the far right, and I'm just not really not comfortable being in the middle.
We will fix that for the next CPAC.
I just, look, of all the things we could talk, there's just two that I really want to highlight. One is, and this is not conspiracy, there's a global effort to have a world without borders. This is a serious, organized effort, and it directly targets governments that get in their way, and it tries to take over governments like ours and use them as instruments to do this. There's a lot of problems with that. One of the biggest one is this is introducing one of the most horrible weapons of mass destruction in modern history, maybe even more horrific than a nuclear weapon. It's the weapon of mass migration. We've seen it in Syria. We saw it in Belarus. We're seeing it now with forced migration and kidnapping of Ukrainian citizens. People are going to figure this out. Chinese, the Iranian, the Venezuelans. Someday somebody's going to go to Latin America and say, here's $1 billion, go send 1 million people to the United States and destabilize them. This is a serious national security issue. And I'll just end saying this. Of all the things we've talked about, not just in this panel, but in this conference, if your nation does not get border security immigration right, you will lose every other issue.
And that's the final word on the subject. Thank you very much for listening to us, and thank you very much for coming to CPAC Hungary.
Thank you very much.